The last thing Caleb Horn expected, when he pulled a girl out of a river on a Tuesday morning in October of 1841, was to still be standing at her mother's campfire 4 hours later, being told that he was going to marry her. He had expected gratitude. He had expected coffee, possibly. He had expected the particular awkward warmth that people produced when someone had recently saved their life, and they were trying to find language adequate to the fact. He had not expected Margaret Webb. Margaret Webb was 41 years old and 5 feet 4 inches tall, and she had been managing impossible situations alone since her husband died in Missouri 4 years ago. And she looked at Caleb Horn across her campfire with the specific calm of a woman who had already made a decision and was now simply informing the relevant party. "My daughter needs a husband," she said. "You went into that river without thinking about it. I have been watching men for 20 years, and I have never once seen that. So it's going to be you." Caleb Horn said no. Margaret Webb said, "I heard you." And she looked at him with the patience of a river that has decided where it is going and is entirely unconcerned about the timeline. This is the story of what happened after that. It started the way most things that change a life start, with a decision that seemed smaller than it was. The decision was Clara Webb's, and it was this. The ford was high and fast, and the rope guide had been washed out in the night. And her mother had said to wait. And Clara had looked at the water for 4 seconds and decided that 4 seconds of looking was sufficient and that she was capable of crossing it. She was wrong about the crossing. She was right about one thing. She had been capable of worse than this and survived it. She had crossed 200 miles of prairie and 3 river crossings and a stretch of alkali flat that had killed 2 oxen and the optimism of everyone on the wagon train who had started the journey thinking it would be scenic. She was 17 years old, and she had the particular stubbornness of someone who had been managing at the edge of her capability for long enough that the edge had started to feel like the center. She went in at the 3rd step, where the current had carved a shelf in the gravel that dropped without warning to 6 feet of fast, cold October water. And the cold removed the air from her lungs before she could use it to scream. And the current took her downstream at the pace of something that had decided where it was going and was not interested in her opinion about it. She thought, very clearly, in the seconds before the cold finished removing her capacity for clarity, "I should have waited." This was accurate. What she did not think, because she did not know he existed, was that 300 yards downstream, a man named Caleb Horn was crouched beside a trap that had failed to spring, in the process of being quietly irritated about it, when something came around the bend in the current that was the wrong shape for a log and the wrong color for a beaver. He looked at it for 1 second. Then he stood up and went in after it. She found the grip before she found the air. That was the order of it. Hands first, then surface, then the gasp that her lungs had been waiting 3 bends of the river to take. She came up coughing with both fists locked into the fabric of a coat she had not yet looked at, attached to a man she had not yet seen. And her first coherent act upon returning to the world of the living was to tighten the grip rather than loosen it. Some people, when they have been close to dying, go soft with relief. Clara Webb was not that kind of person. The man said, "Banks to your left. Stop fighting the current. I've got you." She had not known she was fighting the current. She adjusted. The bank arrived. She got her knees onto the gravel and coughed the river out of herself and breathed the cold air in, and did both of these things without letting go of the coat, a fact she would not fully acknowledge until later when she had the privacy to be embarrassed about it. "You can let go," the man said. "The ground has you." She let go. She sat back on the gravel and looked up at him for the first time. He was the kind of man the wilderness made when it was paying careful attention. Not large in the way of men who had been fed well and worked little. Large in the way of something structural, something built rather than grown. Every part of him earned through the specific curriculum of 12 years in the Rocky Mountains at altitude, which was the most demanding curriculum available in 1841 and arguably in any other year. He wore buckskin from collar to boot, smoke-darkened and trail-worn to the particular softness of clothes that had been slept in and worked in and rained on, until they had become a second skin rather than a garment. He had a beard the color of dark walnut and eyes that were a pale gray blue, and that were, at this moment, performing a rapid and thorough inventory of her condition with the practiced efficiency of someone who had assessed damaged things in the field before and knew exactly which questions mattered. "Name," he said. "Clara," she said. "Clara Webb. Both lungs working?" She breathed deliberately. "Yes." "Head hit anything?" "No." He held up 3 fingers. She said 3. He checked her pupils with 2 fingers under her chin, tilting her face toward the light with the flat clinical attention of a man doing necessary work rather than a man being kind. The distinction was important, and she registered it immediately. "You're not going to die," he said. "I had arrived at the same conclusion," she said. Something moved at the corner of his eyes. The place a smile would be in a face that had decided this was not quite the moment. "You're going to be very cold in about 40 seconds, he said. "When the shock releases, we need to move before that happens." "My mother wants to know you're alive," he said. "Which means we get you warm first. Because if we go to her now—" He stopped, reconsidered. "We get you warm first." She looked at him. "You were going to say something about my mother," she said. "I was going to say she'll worry," he said. This was not what he had been going to say, and they both understood this with complete clarity. "My mother," Clara said, "does not worry. She acts. There is a meaningful difference." He looked at her for one moment with an expression she could not fully name. "Yes," he said, "there is." He started building the fire. He built it the way he did everything. Without performance, without waste, with the quiet efficiency of a man for whom competence had long since stopped feeling like effort and started feeling like breathing. Steel and flint. Char cloth, from a belt pouch kept dry as a principle of survival. 3 strikes. The spark caught. The fire was built in under 2 minutes, positioned against a granite face that would catch the heat and throw it back where it was needed. He put his coat around her shoulders. She looked at the coat. "You're wet too." "I've been wet before," he said. "That is not an argument," she said. "That is a prior occurrence." He looked at her. "You always like this after nearly drowning." "I don't have a basis for comparison," she said. "This is the first time." The place where the smile would be appeared again, slightly closer to the surface. She pulled the coat tighter. It was enormous on her. She was slim and he was not. And it was warm and smelled of wood smoke and pine resin and the clean, cold mineral smell of high mountain air. And she was 17 years old and had been dead for approximately 40 seconds 40 yards upstream. And the coat was warm, and some concessions were practical rather than personal and required no further examination. The fire built itself to the size it needed to be. The shivering began, violent and deep, the kind that meant her body was still generating heat rather than having abandoned the project. And she let it happen because fighting it was wasteful, and she had already wasted enough energy in the river. "Where's your camp?" he said. "Upstream, 1/2 mile." She watched his hands on the fire, the sureness of them, the economy. 14 wagons, We're going to Oregon." He looked at her. "In October," he said. 2 words containing an entire opinion. She had the same opinion. She had expressed it at length and with specificity to Captain Silas Reed 3 weeks ago, and had lost the argument, which was an experience she had not fully made peace with. "We left late," she said, with the flatness of someone reporting a verdict they disagreed with. "Is your father in camp?" he said. The question landed the way it always landed. Not painfully, not anymore, but with the small, specific weight of something you have carried long enough to know its exact shape. "My mother," she said. "It's just my mother and me." He absorbed this without the uncomfortable sympathy that most people produced. The sympathy that looked like sorrow and functioned like a burden, requiring management from the person it was directed at. He absorbed it with the simple, attentive silence of a man filing information, because it was relevant, which was not the same as interesting and not the same as sad. She noticed the difference. She filed it. "She'll want to thank you," Clara said. "People usually do," he said. "After a river." "No." She looked at the fire. "I mean, she will want to thank you specifically, in her particular way." She paused. "I'm not sure how to warn you about that." "You just did," he said. She looked at him. He was watching the fire. "You're not worried," she said. "I've handled difficult situations before," he said. She thought about her mother. She thought about Margaret Webb on a wagon train for 200 miles, managing every crisis that arose with the comprehensive and permanent attention of a woman who had decided that difficulty was simply a feature of the terrain, rather than an argument against moving forward. She thought about Margaret Webb at 41, widowed 4 years, 1 wagon and 1 daughter and a rifle she had learned to use, and opinions about everything that had ever happened within her radius. "You haven't handled this particular situation before," she said. He looked at her then. Actually looked the way he had in the river, with the full weight of that pale gray-blue attention. "She's your mother," he said, "not a force of nature." Clara Webb looked at him with an expression that was, in the space of 1 breath, both the warmest and the most specifically sorry thing he had seen on a human face in 12 years. "Those are not," she said gently, "mutually exclusive categories." They found the camp 50 minutes later, emerging from the river timber into the circle of 14 wagons with the afternoon light already going amber behind the western ridgeline and the smell of cook fires reaching them through the trees. Margaret Webb was at the camp's eastern edge. She had been there, Clara understood without needing to be told, for most of the hour, standing with her arms crossed and her eyes on the tree line and the hunting rifle lowered at her right side and her jaw set in the specific arrangement that meant she was managing something internal and was not going to let it be visible. She saw them come out of the trees. She covered the ground between them in 8 steps, not running. Margaret Webb did not run toward things, because running toward things was a form of losing composure, and she did not lose composure. But moving with the compressed, rapid efficiency of a woman who had decided that the distance between herself and her daughter was unacceptable and was correcting it. Her hands went to Clara's face, both of them, cupping her jaw and tilting her head toward the remaining light, reading her eyes with the rapid, comprehensive attention of someone checking for what they were desperately hoping not to find. "I'm all right, Mama," Clara said. "I can see that." Margaret's voice was level, completely, precisely, deliberately level. "I can also see that you went in the river. The ford has been gone since last night. I sent Thomas Briggs to check it an hour ago." She released Clara's face. Her hands dropped to her sides. "I told you to wait." Clara said nothing. This was the correct response. She had been producing the correct response to this specific tone since she was approximately 4 years old. Margaret turned to Caleb Horn. She looked at him. This was not a glance, and it was not an assessment in the ordinary sense of the word. It was the comprehensive, unhurried reading of a woman who had been making accurate judgments about people under pressure for 20 years of a life that had required it, and who had learned that the first 5 seconds of looking told you more than the next 5 hours of talking if you knew what to look for. She looked at his face, at the wet buckskin, at her daughter's cold, reddened face above the collar of his coat, at the specific quality of the way he was standing, not filling the silence with posture or performance, not producing the awkward deference that most men produced under direct female assessment, simply standing there with the same quality of attention she was giving him, looking back at her with the particular stillness of a man who had spent 12 years in the wilderness and had run out of reasons to pretend to be something he wasn't. She held his gaze for 5 full seconds. He held it back. Something shifted in Margaret Webb's assessment, upward, significantly. "You went in after her," she said. Not a question. She had already determined this from the wet buckskin, in the absence of any version of "I saw what happened and in his posture. "Yes," he said. "You didn't think about it." "No," he said. She was quiet. In that quiet, Caleb Horn had the distinct and accurate impression of a woman making a decision, not the impression of someone considering a decision, not the impression of someone weighing options, but the specific internal stillness of someone who has already arrived at a conclusion and is now simply choosing the moment to announce it. He did not know what the decision was. He would know within 4 hours. "Come into the camp," Margaret said. "You need dry clothes and hot food." "I have a camp," he said. "I'll be—" "Your camp," Margaret Webb said, "is not here." She turned and walked back toward the wagon circle without checking whether he was following. "Come inside." Clara looked at him. In her dark eyes was something that was equal parts apology and inevitability, and one other thing he could not name yet. "She's not always like this," Clara said. He watched Margaret Webb's retreating back, the straightness of it, the total absence of doubt in a single vertebra. "How is she usually?" he said. Clara considered this with genuine honesty. "More so," she said. He followed Margaret Webb into the camp. He did not know, as he crossed that boundary, that he was walking into the most significant 4 hours of his adult life. He did not know that Margaret Webb, in the 5 seconds she had spent reading his face, had already reached the conclusion she was going to spend the next 4 hours executing. He only knew that the coffee she put in his hands without asking was the best thing he had tasted in 3 months, and that somewhere between the river and the fire she had built from the coals of her campfire, in the low amber light of an October afternoon in the Rocky Mountains in 1841, something had changed in the arithmetic of his solitude. Quietly, without announcement, the way rivers change direction, not all at once, but definitively, and with no particular interest in going back. The camp of the Webb wagon was the third from the left in the circle. A single Conestoga, well-maintained and practically organized, with none of the decorative impulse that some of the other wagons allowed themselves. An iron pot over a proper fire. A canvas awning stretched taut between the wagon and a support pole. 2 wooden crates serving as seats. Everything positioned because it was useful there and for no other reason. He sat where she directed him, nearest the fire, and she took Clara to the wagon to change out of the river-soaked clothes, and he sat with the coffee in both hands and looked at the camp. He looked at the single wagon, just one, not 2, not 3. and the practical organization of it, and the rifle leaned against the wheel within immediate reach of where she'd been standing. He looked at the careful gap between this wagon and its neighbors in the circle, slightly wider than necessary, the gap of people who had learned to maintain self-sufficiency even within community. He thought about what Clara had said. "It's just my mother and me." In 1841, on the Oregon Trail, a widow with a daughter and one wagon and a rifle she clearly knew how to use was making a particular and difficult kind of statement about herself and her situation. He had enough respect for difficult statements to read this one fully. He was still reading it when Margaret Webb came back from the wagon. She had left Clara inside to warm. She sat on the second crate, across the fire from him, and poured her own coffee and looked at him with the same direct, comprehensive attention she had used at the camp's edge, except that now there was something additional in it. Something that had arrived during the walk to the wagon and back, something with the quality of a decision that had been made and was waiting for its moment. "How bad is the pass?" she said. "Honestly." He recognized the word. Honestly was the word of someone who had no patience for the comfortable version of the truth and was letting you know in advance. "In October, with 14 wagons," he said, "you have maybe a 2-week window. After that, the snow closes it, and you winter here or you go back." "Going back," she said, "is not available to us." "Then you have 2 weeks," he said. "Possibly less depending on what the weather decides to do." She absorbed this with the nod of someone confirming information they already suspected. The ford. "I know another crossing. 3 miles north. Shallower, slower. Wagons can use it." She looked at him over her coffee. "You know the pass. I've crossed it 8 times, 6 in October. The other 2? November," he said. "Both times I knew better and did it anyway." "Did you make it?" "I'm sitting here," he said. Something moved across her face, brief and warm, and quickly managed back to neutral. She set her coffee down. "I want to talk to you about my daughter," she said. And here was the thing he had not been expecting. Not the words. Words he could have prepared for. What he had not been prepared for was the specific quality of what followed. Not a woman making an awkward request and hoping for grace. Not a mother grasping at an unlikely possibility. But a woman who had surveyed the terrain and chosen her ground and was now, with the unhurried precision of someone who had very little time left to waste, executing the plan she had already decided on. She told him about Clara. About the 17 years of raising her alone. Mostly alone, the last 4 entirely alone, and what alone had produced. A girl who read 3 books in a wagon and drove an ox team and had opinions about fords and kept her grip in cold water, and had the specific stubbornness of someone who had been managing at the edge of her capability for so long that the edge felt like the center. She told him about Oregon, about the land she had filed on in Missouri, the 160 acres of creekside meadow in the Willamette Valley that had been her husband's plan before the fever made it hers alone. About what Oregon meant, permanence, after years of the opposite, a place that was finally a place rather than the next place. She told him about the practical situation. A young woman alone in Oregon in 1841. She did not elaborate on this, because elaboration was unnecessary. He had been in the West long enough to know exactly what a young woman alone in Oregon in 1841 meant and what it cost. And then she said the thing that she had been building toward from the moment she had held his gaze for 5 seconds at the camp's edge and felt the decision arrive fully formed. "You went into that river without thinking about it," she said. "I have been watching men for 20 years, and I have never seen that. Not once. Men think about rivers. They think about the current and the cold, and what it costs them, and whether it is their problem to solve. She looked at him steadily. You didn't think about any of that. You simply went. She paused. That is the only quality I have ever needed, and it is the rarest quality I have ever looked for, and I found it this morning on a riverbank in the Rocky Mountains, and I am not going to pretend that I did not find it. She picked up her coffee. My daughter needs a husband, she said. It's going to be you. Caleb Horne sat across the campfire from Margaret Webb in the October afternoon in the year 1841, and he was quiet for a very long time. He was quiet because he was an honest man and an honest man when he has been told something that is both completely unreasonable and not entirely wrong, requires time. He thought about the mountain, his mountain, the North Fork of the Clearwater at 9,000 feet. The cabin he had built with his own hands over 3 seasons. The specific silence of that altitude that was not empty silence, but full silence. The silence that contained everything, rather than nothing. He thought about 12 years of that silence, and what it had given him, and what it had cost him. And whether he could honestly claim, sitting here with coffee in his hands in a camp of 29 people, that the cost had been acceptable. He thought about Clara Webb's hands on his coat. He thought about the way she had tightened the grip rather than loosening it. He said, "No." Margaret Webb said, "I heard you." And then she said something he had not expected. Not argument, not persuasion, not the application of additional pressure. She simply set her coffee, cup down on the crate beside her, and looked at him with the patience of a woman for whom patience was not a virtue, but a strategy. And she said, "Watch her. Between here and the pass, just watch. And then tell me I'm wrong about what I see." She stood. "You know the alternate ford," she said. "You know the pass. I would consider it a personal kindness if you would guide us through." She looked at him steadily. "In return, I will ask nothing except that you watch my daughter and tell me honestly after whether I was wrong." He looked at her. "And if you weren't," he said. "Then we will have another conversation," she said. She walked back to the wagon. He sat at the fire for a long time after she left. He sat until the fire needed feeding, and he fed it without thinking about it. The automatic competence of his hands, while his mind was somewhere else entirely. He sat while the camp moved through the rhythms of the afternoon around him. The sounds of livestock, of children, of 29 people conducting the ordinary business of a day that had been, for at least 3 of them, anything but ordinary. He thought about no. He thought about the specific word, watch. He thought about a girl who had gripped his coat in cold water and had not let go until the ground had her. And who had said, when he offered to take her to her mother, "Those are not mutually exclusive categories," with the expression of someone who was both warning him and telling him the truth simultaneously. He stood up. He picked up his rifle. He went to find Captain Silas Reed to offer his services as a scout. He told himself he was going to guide them over the pass and then go back to the mountain. He told himself this with the specific conviction of a man who is making a decision in the vicinity of a different decision he has not yet admitted to making. He walked across the camp, and from inside the Webb wagon, behind the canvas, having heard every word of her mother's proposal through the thin fabric wall, Clara Webb sat with her knees drawn up and her hands in her lap and looked at nothing for a long time. She was not embarrassed. She was not angry. She was, and this was the part she could not yet explain, even to herself. She was thinking about a man who had gone into a river without thinking about it. and about what her mother had said, and about the fact that her mother, who was wrong about methods frequently and right about people always, had looked at a stranger for 5 seconds and seen something that Clara, who had been beside that stranger for an hour, had also seen. She was thinking about the grip, about how she had tightened it, about how the ground had been nowhere and his coat had been the only solid thing available, and she had held on with both hands, and it had been. And this was the part she was still examining, carefully, from multiple angles. It had been completely natural. The most natural thing. About an entirely unnatural morning. She put her face in her hands. She stayed that way for a while. Then she took her hands down and looked at the canvas wall and said, very quietly, to no one, "Mama." Not in frustration, not in mortification, in the specific tone of someone who has just understood, against their better judgment and prior intention, that a person who is frequently wrong about methods and always right about people has, once again, looked at a situation and seen it correctly. The canvas wall said nothing back. Outside, the October afternoon was settling into the gold of early evening, and the mountains above the camp were going from amber to shadow. And somewhere across the wagon's circle, a large, quiet man in wet buckskin was introducing himself to a former army captain and offering to scout a trail he had crossed 8 times and knew in the dark. And the Tuesday that had started with a river was not yet finished deciding what it was going to be. He found her that night at the edge of the camp, after supper, after the fire had gone low and most of the camp had gone to their wagons. She was standing at the eastern boundary, the same place her mother had been standing that afternoon, looking at the mountains. He came and stood beside her, and they were quiet for a moment, in the way of 2 people who have shared something significant and have not yet agreed on what to call it. Then she said, without turning, "She told you to watch me." "Yes," he said. "Are you going to?" She was quiet for a moment. The mountains above them were dark shapes against a sky full of stars, so dense and close they seemed to have weight. "I was going to leave after the pass," he said. "Go back to the mountain." She turned and looked at him then. He looked back. The firelight from the camp reached them faintly, just enough to read each other's faces, which was perhaps the exact amount required. "And now," she said. He was quiet for a long time. He looked at the mountains. He looked at her. "I'm going to watch," he said. And Clara Webb turned back to the mountains and said nothing. But something in the set of her shoulders changed. Something eased and something tightened simultaneously. The specific physical response of a person who has received an answer that was both smaller and larger than what they were expecting. And from the Webb wagon, 20 feet behind them, a single candle in the window went out. Margaret Webb, who had been watching from the darkness of her wagon interior with the patience of a river that has decided where it is going, had seen enough for one Tuesday. She went to sleep. She slept, for the first time in 4 years, without the specific weight of someone who has been solving everything alone. It was lighter than she remembered. She had chosen well. She had always known she had chosen well. She had just needed him to start watching. If this opening already has its hand around your heart, like this video right now, drop a comment and tell me where in the world you are watching from tonight. We have listeners from Lagos to London to Los Angeles and every place between, and I read every single one. Subscribe so you never miss a story built like this one. New stories every Wednesday and Saturday. And share this with someone who needs something extraordinary tonight. Clara just heard everything through that canvas wall and said "Mama" in a voice that means she already knows her mother was right. Chapter 2 is coming, and Caleb Horn is about to discover what watching costs. He had agreed to watch. He had not agreed to find anything. These were, he would discover, not the same commitment. Captain Silas Reed was a former Army man of 52, square-built and deliberate, with the specific patience of someone who had spent 30 years making decisions that other people had to live with and had developed, through that experience, a finely calibrated respect for competence over credentials. He met Caleb at the camp's western boundary at dusk, shook his hand with the grip of a man establishing terms, and looked at him the way he looked at terrain. Not for what it presented, but for what it concealed. "Mrs. Webb says you know the alternate ford," Reed said. 3 miles north, gravel bed wide and shallow. Wagons can cross it. You've used it. Twice. Once with horses, once alone. Never with wagons. He paused. But the bottom's sound and the line is straight. I'll ride it tomorrow before first light and mark the crossing. Reed absorbed this. You know the pass. 8 crossings, 6 in October. The other 2? November, Caleb said. Both times I knew better. Did you make them? I'm standing here. Reed was quiet for a moment, looking at the mountains the way men looked at obstacles they had already decided to move through. What do you want for it? Reed said. Nothing I can name yet, Caleb said. It was not the answer Reed had expected. He looked at Caleb for a long moment, the look of a man who had received unexpected honesty and was deciding whether to trust it. All right, he said. You'll ride scout. You'll have authority on the trail. The line moves when you move, stops when you stop. My word to the train. He paused. In return, you eat with us and sleep under the Webb wagon, which is the driest ground in the circle because Mrs. Webb repitched the awning 3 days ago before the rain and nobody else thought to. Caleb looked at him. She pitched it herself, Reed said, with the specific tone of a man who had watched this happen and had found it both impressive and faintly exhausting. Caleb said nothing. Reed shook his hand again, the closing grip, terms established, and walked back to the center of the camp. Caleb stood at the western boundary for a moment and looked at the mountains and thought about nothing in particular. Then he went to sleep under the Webb wagon, which was in fact the driest ground in the circle, because Margaret Webb had repitched the awning 3 days ago before the rain, and she had done it correctly. He noted this without comment. He slept well. The ford took most of the following morning. 3 miles north, the river spread itself over a wide gravel bed and became something manageable. Still cold, still purposeful, but shallow enough and slow enough for oxen and wagon wheels. The current distributed across width rather than compressed into depth. He rode his horse across it 4 times before he was satisfied, reading the gravel with his boots on the second crossing, mapping the soft spots, marking the line of approach with cut branches on the near bank. Then he guided the wagons across. This was not a simple operation. 14 wagons, each with its own particular personality, its own ox team temperament, its own wheel geometry, its own load. Distribution and center of gravity required individual management rather than collective instruction. Reed organized the formation. Caleb managed the river. He was in the water for 3 hours. He repositioned the crossing line twice when the gravel shifted under the weight of successive wagons. He pulled the third wagon's lead ox through a section where the animal had decided, with the comprehensive intractability specific to oxen, that it disagreed with the entire enterprise. He was at the right wheel of the 7th wagon when it found a soft spot and listed, not dangerously, not yet, but in the direction of dangerously, and got his shoulder under the axle and held it long enough for the team to pull through. He did these things with the same quality he brought to everything. without performance, without the commentary that most men produced when they were working hard and wanted the work acknowledged. He simply did what each moment required and moved to the next moment. He was aware, for approximately half of those 3 hours, that Clara Webb was watching him from the box of the 12th wagon. He did not look at her. He was not ready to look at her yet. The 12th wagon was the Webb wagon. Clara drove it across the ford herself. Margaret was inside with a shoulder that had been troubling her since the second day, a pain she had mentioned once and had not mentioned again, which told him more than mentioning it repeatedly would have. Clara handled the ox team with the matter-of-fact competence of someone who had learned this skill under conditions that made the learning stick. And she held the crossing line he had marked without deviation and brought the wagon up the far bank without incident. He was at the downstream side when she crossed, watching the wheel depth, ready. She did not need him. He watched anyway. When the wagon was up the bank and clear, she looked down from the box at him. Briefly, directly, with those dark eyes that were always doing the same thing, taking account, without announcement, of everything in their radius. She said nothing. He said nothing. The 13th wagon needed his attention, and he moved to it. He thought, as he moved, she knew I was watching the whole time. He thought, she did not change anything about how she drove. He filed this. He was building a file without having intended to, and it was filling faster than he was comfortable with. They made 8 miles that afternoon on good trail. The ford behind them and the mountains ahead and the weather cooperating in the specific temporary way of October weather that was resting between intentions. That evening, the camp was easy. The ease of people who had solved a problem and had not yet encountered the next one. The ease that on a wagon train was rare enough to be conscious of when it arrived. He ate at the communal fire. Reed's wife served the food, salt pork and cornbread, coffee that was thin but present. And the questions came at him from around the circle with the friendly directness of people who had decided he was trustworthy and were now simply curious. Yes, he had been here since 1829. No, not been back east. Yes, alone, every winter. No, it was not as hard as they imagined. This last answer produced a silence that was specifically the silence of 29 people imagining something they had decided they could not have done, and finding this both impressive and faintly sad, which was the standard response and the response he had the least to say about. He answered the questions with a short, unembellished honesty that was his only mode. And the questions stopped in the natural way of campfire questions when the fire went low, and the company went to their wagons. He was not alone. She came to the fire an hour after the camp had quieted. Not Margaret, Clara. She came alone without the specific purposefulness of her mother's movements, without the quality of someone executing a plan. She came with 2 cups of coffee, and she set one in front of him and sat down across the fire, with her knees drawn up and the dark green wool dress, her mother's, he had assessed, given to her or inherited, and her dark hair loose for the evening, damp still at the ends from where she had washed the trail dust out of it. He looked at the coffee. "Your mother sent you," he said. "My mother is asleep," she said. "I make my own decisions about coffee." He picked up the cup. She was looking at the fire with the focused, inward attention of someone who has come to say something and is taking the last moment before saying it to decide whether to say it exactly as prepared or to trust the conversation to find the shape it needs. "I heard what she said to you," Clara said. The words were even. Not an apology, not a disclaimer. A fact, placed on the table between them for both of them to see plainly. He said nothing. "I want you to know," she said. And here, The care in her voice was audible. The care of someone who has thought about exactly these words and has decided they are the right ones. That I did not ask her to do that. I did not know she intended to do that. And I am not... She paused. I am not a problem that needs solving by a stranger who happened to be downstream. He looked at her across the fire. I know, he said. Then why? She said. Did you come back? It was the right question. It was the question that had been waiting since he had walked out of the camp after Margaret's proposal and walked for 45 minutes going nowhere, and then turned around and walked back. He had not fully answered it himself. He owed her the attempt. Because she asked me to watch, he said. And because... He stopped. Because, she said. He looked at the fire. Because walking away from a situation and going back to the mountain would have been easy, he said. And I have been doing easy things for 12 years, and I have become very good at them. And there is something about becoming very good at easy things that starts to feel, after a while, like a question you are not answering. The fire moved between them. Clara Webb was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "What is the question?" He was quiet. "Whether I still need the mountain," he said, "or whether I am just afraid of what I would be without it." The honesty of it surprised him slightly. He was not generally a man who said things like this. Not because he was closed, but because there had been no one to say them to. And the habit of interior honesty had not previously required exterior expression. She received it the way she received everything, without drama, without the performance of being moved, simply with the full, attending presence of someone for whom what you said mattered enough to be held carefully. "Those are different questions," she said. "Yes," he said. "Which one is it?" He looked at the fire. "I don't know yet," he said. She nodded, not the nod of someone receiving an unsatisfying answer, but the nod of someone who recognizes honesty in its specific shape and is confirming the recognition. "I have a question of my own," she said. "Yes." "When you watched me drive the Ford today," she said, "what were you looking for?" He was quiet for a moment. "I don't know," he said. "I wasn't looking for anything. I was just..." He stopped. "Watching," she said. "Yes." "And?" He looked at her across the fire. He thought about the answer. He thought about the honest version of the answer, which was the only version available to him, and whether saying it would cost something he wasn't prepared to spend. "And," he said carefully, "you drove it exactly as you would have driven it if I hadn't been watching. You didn't change your line. You didn't look at me to check whether you were doing it correctly. You read the crossing yourself and you drove it and you brought the wagon up the bank, and then you looked at me for exactly 1 second. She was very still across the fire. "And what did that tell you?" she said. "That you know the difference," he said, "between doing something for yourself and doing something for an audience, and that you were doing it for yourself." The fire moved. An owl called from the timber to the north. Somewhere in the rope corral, a horse shifted and resettled. Clara Webb looked at him across the fire for a long time, with an expression he was beginning to learn. The one that meant the reading was returning something she had not fully expected, but was not entirely surprised by. The expression that was specific to finding in a person who had arrived unexpectedly, a quality she had been looking for in places that had not had it. She stood up. "Tomorrow," she said, "when we make camp. What should I bring besides coffee?" Looked at her. "Your books," he said. She had not expected that. He saw the surprise move through her face, unguarded, brief, genuine. And then the thing that followed it, which was the warmth she kept carefully managed, and which had just, for 1 second, gotten loose. "Good night, Caleb Horn," she said. "Good night, Clara Webb," he said. She walked back to the wagon. He sat at the fire for a long time after she left, feeding it when it needed feeding, looking at the mountains that were dark shapes against the brilliant, unreasonable density of the stars at altitude. He thought about what he had said. He thought, "I told her the truth about the mountain, and it was the easiest sentence I have said in 12 years. He thought about that. He was still thinking about it when he went to his bedroll under the Webb wagon. And the thinking did not stop when he closed his eyes. And this was new, and he did not yet know what to call it. And he lay in the dark under the stars and listened to the camp breathe around him and was, for the first time in 12 years of deliberate solitude, not certain that what he was lying in was silence. It had the shape of silence. It had the temperature of silence. But something in it had changed. He lay in it for a long time. He watched for 3 days. He did not do this as a project. He did not do it as a fulfillment of a promise to Margaret Webb. He watched the way he watched everything in the field, continuously, peripherally, with the attention of someone for whom observation was not a deliberate act, but a permanent condition. He simply watched, and what he saw accumulated the way evidence accumulated, quietly, without declaring its significance until the weight of it demanded acknowledgement. He watched her read. She had 3 books in the wagon. He did not know the titles yet. And she read in the evenings by the firelight with a focused intensity that was entirely private, the reading of someone for whom books were not a social activity but a necessity, the way water was a necessity, the way altitude was a necessity to a man who had been breathing it for 12 years. She did not perform the reading. She simply disappeared into it, fully in the way that people disappeared into things that were genuinely essential to them. He watched her handle the ox team on the 2nd day, when Margaret's shoulder gave out entirely, and she said nothing about it, and came inside the wagon, and Clara climbed to the box without comment or ceremony, and drove the team the rest of the day with the economical competence of someone who had absorbed this skill so thoroughly that deploying it required less energy than explaining it. He watched her navigate the social landscape of 29 people in close proximity, the particular and demanding art of a wagon train, where everyone's proximity to everyone else was both unavoidable and consequential. She did this with a warmth that was genuine, but not indiscriminate. She was not warm to everyone equally. She was warm to each person specifically, with the attention of someone who had noticed what each one needed and had decided whether and how to offer it. He watched all of this, and on the 3rd day, in the evening, Margaret Webb came to him, not at the communal fire. At his horse, where he was checking the left foreleg, the animal had taken a small stone at the ford, and he was monitoring the heat in the tendon with the daily diligence of a man who understood that a lame horse in the mountains in October was a different category of problem than a lame horse anywhere else. She stood beside him and was quiet for a moment. "Well," she said. He ran his hand along the leg. "Well, what?" "You've been watching for 3 days," she said. "I am not asking for a report. I am simply noting that you have been watching for 3 days and you have not left." He said nothing. "You were going to leave after the ford," she said. "You told yourself you were guiding us to the ford and then going back to the mountain." He checked the tendon, warm but not hot. He would check it again in the morning. "And then you were going to leave after the first camp," she said. "And then after the second." She paused. 3 days, Mr. Horn. Caleb." He stood up, He looked at her. Margaret Webb looked back at him with the specific expression she had used on the riverbank, the comprehensive, unhurried reading. Except that now there was something else in it that had not been there on the riverbank. Not triumph. Not the satisfaction of someone whose plan was working. Something quieter and more personal than either of those things. "She's not performing for you," Margaret said. "That is what you've been watching for, whether any of it was for you. And it isn't." He said nothing. "That is what is rare," Margaret said. "A person who is entirely themselves in front of a stranger. Most people, most good people even, adjust. They present the version they think is needed." She looked at him steadily. "She has been exactly herself for 3 days, in front of you." He was quiet for a moment. "So have you," he said. Margaret blinked. Once. The specific blink of someone who has been seen by a stranger more accurately than they expected and is adjusting to the exposure. Then she said, "Yes, I have." She turned to go. "Margaret," he said. She stopped. Did not turn. "Why Oregon?" he said. "Specifically. There are places closer. Places that don't require a mountain pass in October. You are a woman who makes careful decisions. This decision has a reason," she said. "Yes," he said. She was quiet for a moment. She turned. She looked at him with an expression he had not seen on her face before. Not the assessment, not the patience, not the plan. Something underneath all of those. Something that had been carrying all of those on. Its back for a long time. And that was tired in the specific way of something that has been weight-bearing for years without acknowledgement. "My husband chose Oregon," she said. "Before the fever, we had a claim filed, 160 acres on a creek in the Willamette Valley. He had drawn a picture of the house." She paused. A very detailed picture. He was that kind of man. He drew the windows in. She was quiet for a moment. "He died before we could go. And I had 2 choices. I could stay where we were, which was a place that was entirely made of his absence. Or I could go where we were going, which was the place he had drawn the windows in." She looked at him. "So I went," she said. "We went." He stood beside his horse in the evening light and held this. "How long did it take you to decide?" he said. "About as long," she said, "as it took you to go into the river." She walked back to the wagon. He stood beside his horse in the quiet that she left behind, and he thought about a man in Missouri who had drawn windows into a house that was going to be built on a creek in the Willamette Valley, and a woman who had taken his plan and his wagon and his rifle and his daughter and carried all of it over the Rocky Mountains in October because the alternative was staying in the shape of his absence. He thought about the word specifically. He thought, she did not go because she had no choice. She had choices. She went because she had made a decision about what mattered more than difficulty. He thought about 12 years on a mountain. He thought about the specific question he had been not answering. He stood there for a while. Then he went and found Clara at the eastern boundary of the camp, where she was standing in the dark, looking at the mountains, which was where she had been on the first night and which was apparently where she came when she needed to think. He came and stood beside her. They were quiet together in the way they had learned over 3 evenings at the fire to be quiet. The quiet of 2 people who had found that each other's silence was not an absence, but a presence. "Your father drew the windows in," he said. She turned to look at him. "She told you," Clara said. "Yes." She turned back to the mountains. "He had a notebook," she said, "full of drawings, the house, the barn, the kitchen garden, how the creek would run past the south pasture." She was quiet for a moment. He drew my room with a window that faced east, so I could see the mountains when I woke up. He said nothing. She carried the notebook the whole trail, Clara said. She doesn't know I know that. She kept it wrapped in oilcloth at the bottom of the supply chest. She thought I was asleep the night she took it out and looked at it. She paused. I was not asleep. He looked at the mountains. He thought, a woman who went to Oregon with her dead husband's notebook and drew a stranger out of a river to solve the last problem on the list. He thought, that is not a managing woman. That is a woman who has been finishing something for 4 years and has almost reached the end of it. He thought about the weight of that. She's right about the situation, Clara said. I want you to know that I know that. She is wrong about... She stopped. She handles things the way she handles everything, directly. Without, the method is not always. I know, he said. But the situation is real, she said. Oregon is real. What it means to arrive there with no man and no... She stopped again. It's real. I know, he said. She turned and looked at him. In the dark, with the fire from the camp reaching them faintly and the stars overhead doing what the stars did at altitude, pressing down with their improbable density and weight. She looked at him with the direct, unguarded attention that was her specific quality, the attention that did not manage itself for the benefit of the audience. I'm not asking you for anything, she said. I want to be clear about that. I know, he said. I am only saying... She paused. I am saying that I have been watching you for 3 days also, and that what I have seen... She stopped. What have you seen? He said. She was quiet for a moment. A man, she said carefully, who has been asking a question on a mountain for 12 years, and who might, I think, might have just heard the beginning of an answer. He looked at her. The fire from the camp behind them, the stars above them, the mountains in their enormous darkness all around. The October air cold and clean and thin enough to make everything feel slightly more actual than it did at sea level. He thought about an answer. He thought about 12 years. He thought about a girl who had tightened her grip in cold water. He said, I'm going to talk to your mother. Clara Webb looked at him for one long moment. Then she said very quietly, Be specific. I'm always specific, he said. I know, she said. That is why I said it. He walked across the camp toward the Webb wagon. He did not yet know what he was going to say. He knew it was going to be specific. He knew it was going to be honest. He knew that Margaret Webb, who was sitting in the wagon with a candle and a notebook wrapped in oilcloth that she had been carrying since Missouri, was going to hear it and make the only response available to a woman who had chosen well. He walked across the camp, and Clara Webb turned back to the mountains and breathed the October air and felt something shift in her chest. The specific shift of something that has been held in uncertainty for long enough that the direction of its resolution, when it finally tilts, is felt in the body before it is understood in the mind. Not relief. Not quite. Something that was one step past the place where relief lived. The beginning of something she did not yet have a name for. But that felt in the cold, clear air of the Rocky Mountains in October of 1841. With the stars pressing down and the camp quiet around her, and the sound of a man's boots crossing the ground toward her mother's wagon, exactly like arriving somewhere she had not known she was going. Which was, she would think later, the only way to arrive at the things that mattered, without expecting them, going anyway. He sat across from Margaret Webb in the candlelight of the wagon, and he told her what he had to say in the plainest words he had, and she listened all the way through without interrupting, which he had not expected. and when he finished, she was quiet for a long time. And then she reached into the bottom of the supply chest and she brought out the notebook wrapped in oilcloth, and she set it on the blanket between them, and she said, "I want you to see what we are going toward." He looked at the notebook. He looked at her. In her face, in the candlelight, was the only expression he had not seen there yet. Not the plan, not the patience, not the assessment. Something private and enormous and very carefully held. The expression of a woman who has been carrying something alone for 4 years and has just decided, in this specific candlelit moment, that she does not have to carry it the rest of the way alone. She opened the notebook. She turned it toward him, and he looked at the drawings of a house on a creek in the Willamette Valley, with the windows drawn in, and understood, with the specific, irreversible clarity of things understood too late to unknow, exactly what he had walked into on that riverbank, and why, and what it was going to ask of him, and what he was going to give. If you are feeling what this story is asking you to feel right now, that weight of a woman who carried a notebook across a continent and asked a stranger to help her finish what her husband started. Like this video. That is the story you came for, and we are only halfway through it. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you are watching from tonight. Subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Share it with someone who has been carrying something they haven't yet been able to put down. Chapter 3 is the pass and the storm, and Margaret's final truth told in candlelight. Don't leave. He had told Reed the window was 2 weeks. He had believed it when he said it. The weather had not been consulted. The storm came on the 8th day. Not as a surprise. Nothing about mountain weather was a surprise to a man who had been reading it for 12 years. He had seen it building for 2 days in the specific way of serious October storms. The barometric drop he felt in his knees before he saw it in the sky. The quality of light that went from clear to veiled to the particular flat gray of a sky that had decided something. The wind shifting northeast in the small hours of the 7th night and staying there. He told Reed at dawn on the 8th day. "We move now," he said. "All day. No midday halt." Reed looked at the sky with the assessment of a former soldier who had learned to trust weather intelligence from men who knew the terrain. How bad? Bad enough that we don't want to be at elevation when it arrives, Caleb said. The summit is 8 miles. If we move by first light and hold the pace, we cross it by mid-afternoon and make the tree line on the eastern descent before dark. He paused. If we don't hold the pace, we spend the night on the exposed ridge. And if we spend the night on the exposed ridge, we lose animals, Caleb said. Possibly wagons, possibly people. Reed's jaw set in the specific arrangement of a man who had heard what he needed to hear. We move at first light. They moved at first light. The summit trail in October was not the summit trail in June. In June, the grades were the same. The mountains did not adjust their geometry for seasonal sentiment. But the trail surface was firm, and the exposure was only exposure, and the sky was a participant rather than an adversary. In October, the trail surface was soft from the 2 days of early snow that had fallen and partially melted and refrozen into the specific treachery of ice beneath a deceptive skin of loose material. And the grades that were negotiable in June became the grades that made oxen plant their feet and refuse. And the exposure was no longer merely exposure, but the direct engagement of wind that had come from the northwest, without anything in its path to diminish it. He worked the column the way he worked everything, reading it, adjusting to it, solving problems before they became crises. He was in 6 places at once. He was at the front marking the line, reading the trail surface, calling the pace, He was at the rear, watching the last wagon's wheel depth on the soft ground. He was at the left side of the fourth wagon when its front wheel found the shelf of ice beneath the trail skin, and the wagon tilted, not dangerously yet, not quite, but in the direction of dangerously. And he was off his horse and had his shoulder under the axle before Reed had finished organizing a response. He felt the weight of the wagon through the bones of his shoulder and his back and his legs, and he held it, not indefinitely. He was not built for indefinitely, but long enough for the team to find purchase, and the wheel to clear the shelf, and the wagon to right itself, and the crisis to become an incident, and the incident to be filed, and the column to continue moving. He got back on his horse. The next problem was already waiting. He was aware of the Webb wagon for the full 8 miles. Not watching. He was too occupied for watching. The mountain was requiring everything he had, and some things he was manufacturing from the reserve. But aware. The specific peripheral awareness of a man who has, over 3 days, calibrated the presence of a particular wagon in the particular way you calibrate the things that matter to you. The Webb wagon was the 11th. Clara on the box. Margaret inside with a shoulder that had moved past, troubling, into something she still was not mentioning. Clara held the crossing line he had marked without deviation. She drove the grades with the economical deliberateness of someone who was reading the trail herself, rather than waiting to be told how to read it. She did not call for him. She did not look for him. She drove the mountain the way she drove everything, for herself. He came alongside her wagon at the 4th mile, the mile where the grades steepened and the wind came in fully, and the snow that had been threatening became the snow that had decided. And he rode beside her for 200 yards without speaking, reading the trail ahead, reading the team, reading her. She glanced at him once. He glanced back. She returned her eyes to the trail. He rode forward to the next problem. At the summit, at the specific moment when the last wagon cleared the exposed ridge and began the eastern descent, and the worst of the exposure was behind them, he stopped his horse and sat and watched them pass. Counted them, 1 through 14. The snow was real now, driven horizontal by the northeast wind, the kind of snow that made the world a smaller and more immediate place, reduced to the 20 feet directly ahead and the immediate necessity of the next step. 14. He exhaled. He rode down after them. The camp at Tree Line that night was the best camp of the journey. Not because it was comfortable. The snow was still coming, and the wind had not finished its business, and the temperature had dropped to the place where breath was visible, and everything metal was cold enough to hold your hand to briefly, but because of what 29 people had been through together to earn it. There was a quality to that camp that no comfortable camp could match. The fires were high. The food was what it was. Salt pork, cornbread, the thin coffee that was better than nothing, but eaten with the specific appetite of people who had used everything they had and needed it back. The conversation was the conversation of people who had looked at a hard thing and found, to their relief and their pride in equal measure, that they had been sufficient to it. He sat at the communal fire and answered the questions that came at him, and accepted Reed's hand for the 4th time, and felt the weight of the day, leaving his body in the way it always left. Slowly, from the outside in, the muscles releasing in the order they had been recruited. Reed said, "Name it, whatever you want." "I told you," Caleb said. "Nothing I can name yet." Reed looked at him for a long moment. He looked at the Webb wagon at the edge of the circle. He looked back at Caleb. He nodded once, with the specific nod of a man who has just understood something he had not understood before, and went back to his fire. Clara came to him at the fire an hour after the camp quieted. She brought the books. Both of them had forgotten he had asked, or both of them had remembered and neither had mentioned it. She set them on the ground beside him without comment. 3 volumes, worn but carefully kept, their spines soft from handling, and sat across the fire with her own coffee. He looked at the books. He looked at her. "Read," she said. "Or don't." "But you asked." He picked up the top volume. He read the title. He set it down and picked up the second. "You've read all of them," he said. "Multiple times," she said. "On a wagon." "Books don't require flat surfaces," she said. "That is one of their better qualities." He almost smiled. The full version, not the place where a smile would be, but the actual thing. It arrived briefly and was gone before she had time to fully confirm it. She had time. She confirmed it. They were quiet together for a while, the fire between them and the snow outside the ring of its warmth and the mountain behind them and Oregon somewhere ahead. And neither of them reached for words because the silence was doing better work than words would have done. After a while, she said, "My mother wants to talk to you tonight." "I know," he said. "She was awake when I came out," Clara said. "She's always awake. I have never in my life known her to be asleep when something needed managing." "What does she think needs managing tonight?" he said. Clara looked at the fire. "She thinks the pass is behind us," she said. "Which means Oregon is ahead. Which means she is going to say what she has been not saying since the ford, because the ford and the pass were first and now they are behind us." He looked at her. "Clara," he said. She looked at him. "What do you want?" he said. "Not from the situation, not from Oregon. From this. From whatever this is." He paused. "What do you want?" She was quiet for a long time. The fire moved between them. "I want," she said carefully, "to know a person, not to be arranged with a person, not to be the solution to a situation with a person." She looked at the fire. "I want to sit across a fire from someone who says what they mean and means what they say, and who is not performing any of what they are." She looked at him. "I want what is actual." He held her gaze. "I want the same thing," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "I know," she said. "That is why I brought the books." He looked at the books on the ground beside him. He looked at her. "Go," she said. "She's waiting, and she doesn't sleep until the things that need doing are done." He went. Margaret Webb was sitting in the wagon with a single candle and the notebook in her lap, and the specific waiting quality of someone who has known exactly what the night was going to ask of her and has been ready for it since well before it arrived. He climbed into the wagon. He sat across from her. He looked at the notebook. "I want you to see what we are going toward," she said. She opened it. She turned it toward him. He looked at the drawings. They were done in pencil, carefully, with the specific attention of someone who had loved the idea before it was real and had wanted to hold it steady on paper until it could be made real. The house was modest, but well considered. A man who thought about where the windows went was a man who had thought about what the people inside would need from the light. The creek was drawn in at the south corner. The kitchen garden was east-facing. His daughter's room had a window facing east, and the mountain range was suggested beyond it in a few soft pencil lines. He looked at the drawings for a long time. He thought about what it meant to carry something like this across a continent. He thought about what it meant to carry it alone. He looked at Margaret Webb. In the candlelight, she looked, for the first time, because she had never permitted it before, tired. Not the tiredness of a day or a week or even a year. The tiredness of someone who has been the only person responsible for a thing for long enough that they have forgotten what it felt like to share the weight. "He sounds like a man worth going to Oregon for," Caleb said. Margaret looked at him. Something moved across her face, fast and private and immediately managed. "He was," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I need to tell you what I am and what I am not." "Tell me," she said. "I am a man who has been alone for 12 years, he said. "I know how to do that. I do not know how to do this, whatever this becomes. I will make mistakes that a man with more practice would not make." He paused. "I am not a substitute for him. I cannot be, and I will not pretend to be." "I am not asking you to be," Margaret said. "I never was." "I know," he said. "I am saying it so we are clear." She nodded. "I am also telling you," he said, "that I watched your daughter for 3 days, and she is—" He stopped. He looked for the precise word, which was the only word worth using. "She is actual," he said. "She is exactly what she is. In front of a stranger, without adjustment. That is the rarest thing I have encountered in 12 years of being in the wilderness, which is saying something because the wilderness does not perform either." Margaret looked at him. "I know what she is," she said quietly. "I know you do," he said. "I am telling you that I know it now too." The candle moved between them. Outside, the snow had stopped. The wind had shifted. The camp was quiet. "What are you proposing?" Margaret said. "Oregon first," he said. "The claim, the land, whatever needs building. I know how to build." He paused. "And then, if she wants it, a conversation between the two of us. Not arranged, not a solution to a situation. A conversation between two people who have been watching each other and have decided the watching is worth continuing." Margaret looked at him for a long time. "And if she decides no," Margaret said. "Then she decides no," he said. "And I have helped a widow and her daughter reach Oregon, and I have not wasted the trip." Margaret was quiet. She looked at the notebook in her lap. She closed it. She looked at him. And then she said the thing he had not expected. Not about the terms, not about Oregon, not about Clara. The thing that was underneath all of those. The thing she had been carrying below the plane and below the patience and below the management of everything for 4 years. And that she said now, in the candlelight, with the specific exhausted honesty of a woman who has been solving everything alone for long enough that honesty feels, in the end, like the only remaining economy. "I am not well," she said. He was still. "The shoulder," he said. "The shoulder is the shoulder," she said. "What is not well is—" She stopped. "Something in my chest, something that has been there since winter. The kind of thing that a doctor in Missouri looks at and speaks carefully about." He understood what careful speech from a doctor meant. "How long?" he said. She was quiet for a moment. "Long enough to get to Oregon," she said. "Long enough to see the house built. Long enough—" She stopped. "I don't know exactly. I don't think anyone does." She looked at him directly. "Long enough that this was not optional. What I asked of you at the campfire, it was not optional." He sat with this. He sat with the full weight of it. Not the weight of his own situation, not what it meant for what he had agreed to, but the weight of what she had been carrying. What it had cost to drive a wagon 200 miles with, that knowledge in her chest, and not let it slow the pace. "Does Clara know?" he said. "She suspects," Margaret said. "She is too perceptive not to suspect. She does not know because if she knew, she would spend every day that is left focused on the wrong thing." "You are not the wrong thing," he said. "The wrong thing," Margaret said. with the patience of a woman who had thought about this more than he could imagine, would be to spend whatever time remains being grieved for rather than loved. There is a difference. I would prefer to be loved. He looked at her. This woman who had been managing everything alone, who had carried a notebook across a continent, who had looked at a stranger for 5 seconds on a riverbank and made a decision that she had executed with the precision of someone who understood that precision was a form of love. "You will be loved," he said. It was not a reassurance. It was a statement of what he intended. Margaret Webb looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, quietly, with the specific weight of someone setting down something they have been carrying for a very long time, "Thank you." He climbed down from the wagon. He stood in the cold night air and looked at the stars, which were doing what stars did at altitude, pressing down with their weight, demanding acknowledgement of the scale of things. He looked at the mountains behind him, the pass they had crossed, the eastern face that was already behind them. He looked at the trail ahead. He breathed. Then he went back to the fire, and he sat. And Clara was still there, and she looked at him when he sat down and read his face with the dark eyes that read everything. And she said nothing, which was the right thing, because some things needed to settle before they needed to be spoken. They sat together until the fire went to coals. He did not tell her what her mother had said. He thought about how to tell her. He thought about when. He thought about the windows her father had drawn into a house in the Willamette Valley and what it meant to be the person who built them. He thought, "I am going to build those windows," he thought. "I am going to build all of it." He looked at Clara Webb across the dying fire, and she looked back at him, and he said, without planning to, "Your father drew your room so you could see the mountains." She went very still. "Yes," she said. "East-facing window," he said. "The mountains in the distance." She looked at him. Her eyes were bright in the firelight, in the specific way of eyes that are managing something. "You saw the notebook?" she said. "Yes," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "He would have liked you," she said. "He was that kind of man. He liked people who went into things without calculating them first." He held that. "Get some sleep," he said. "Oregon is 12 days. "I know," she said. She stood. She looked at him for one more moment. "Caleb," she said. "Yes." "Whatever she told you tonight," she said. "I'm glad she told you." She went to the wagon. He sat alone at the coals for a while. Then he went to his bedroll and lay in the dark and thought about a house on a creek and a window facing east and what it cost to build the things that were worth keeping. He did not sleep for a long time. When he did, he slept without dreaming, which was, for a man who had been alone for 12 years, a new thing. 12 days later, the Willamette Valley opened in front of them like something that had been waiting. Not dramatically, not with the grandeur of the mountains, not with the violent beauty of the pass, but with the specific, deep, ordinary beauty of a place that was built for living in. The creek ran clear at the south corner of the claim, exactly where the notebook said it would. The Douglas firs stood where they would provide windbreak and timber both. The meadow was flat and well-drained and dark, with the specific richness of soil that had been resting for a long time and was ready. Margaret Webb stood at the edge of it and looked at it for a long time without speaking. Clara stood beside her. He stood behind them both. And Margaret Webb, who had driven a wagon 200 miles with something in her chest that a Missouri doctor had spoken carefully about, and who had carried a notebook the whole way, and who had looked at a stranger on a riverbank and made the best decision of the last 4 years. Margaret Webb made a sound he had not heard from her before. Small and brief and immediately controlled. The sound of someone who has been holding something for a very long time and has just, finally, put it down. They made it to Oregon. Margaret stood on her husband's land, and the sound she made, that small, controlled sound of something finally set down. That is what this whole story has been moving toward. If you felt it land the way it was supposed to land, like this video right now, tell me in the comments the one word that describes how you feel at this moment. Subscribe and share this with someone who is carrying something they need permission to put down. Chapter 4 is the house and the windows, and the conversation that was always going to belong to Clara and Caleb alone. He built it the way his father had taught him, and the mountain had confirmed. From the ground up, with attention to what was permanent. The foundation first. He spent 3 days on the foundation alone, reading the soil, setting the corners, getting the level exact before a single log was laid. And Margaret watched him do this from the camp chair Clara had set at the meadow's edge. And she said on the second day, "Most men would have the walls up by now." "Most men's walls fall down," he said. She said nothing further about the pace. He had help from 3 of the men from the wagon train, who had claimed adjacent land, and who came in the mornings before. Their own work pulled them away. Good men, the frontier kind, who worked without needing direction once the direction was given, and who went home in the evenings, having given what they could, and not keeping account of it. Clara worked beside him. This was not a surprise. Nothing about Clara Webb was a surprise anymore, which was itself a thing worth noting. He had been in the mountains for 12 years, and the mountains were full of things that surprised him daily. And he had known this woman for 3 weeks, and she had stopped surprising him. Not because she had become predictable, because he had learned her actual shape, and the actual shape of her matched what she presented, without gap or revision. And when a thing was what it was without concealment, there was nothing left to be surprised by. She worked with the same quality she brought to everything, without waste, without performance, without the need to have the work acknowledged. She learned the joinery by watching him do it twice and then doing it herself. And the 3rd repetition was as good as his, which he told her because it was true, and because he had decided, without examining the decision, that telling her true things was what he intended to do. "You're a fast learner," he said. "I had good instruction," she said. "You didn't need it after the 2nd time," he said. She looked at him, the reading look. "Is that a complaint?" "No," he said. "Then what is it?" "An observation," he said. "I make them." "I know," she said. "I have noticed." She went back to the joinery. He went back to the wall. The house went up in 5 weeks. It was not a large house, 2 rooms below and a sleeping loft above, a kitchen that faced south for light, a porch on the east side where the morning came in. It was a well-built house. The logs were fitted with the precision of someone who understood that the gaps were where the cold came in, and the cold in Oregon. Winters was not the cold of the Rockies, but was real enough. And the roof had the pitch it needed, and the overhang it needed, and the porch posts were straight. He built the windows last. There were 4 of them. He had brought glass on the horse from the nearest settlement. Strapped in canvas, a 2-day trip he had made without mentioning it until he returned with it. And Margaret had looked at the glass and then looked at him and said nothing. And the nothing was the specific quality of someone receiving something they have been carrying toward for a long time. He built Clara's room last. The window in Clara's room faced east. He set the glass himself and chinked the frame himself and stood back and looked at it in the morning light. And the light came through it at the exact angle he had intended and fell across the floor of the room in the specific way that her father had drawn it. 12 years before she was the age she was now, in a notebook in Missouri. He did not tell her. This was intentional. She found out anyway. She found out on the morning after the house was finished, the first morning any of them slept inside it. When she came downstairs and found him at the kitchen table with the notebook open in front of him, comparing what he had built to what had been drawn. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs. She looked at the notebook. She looked at him. He looked at her. "The window," she said. "Yes," he said. She was quiet for a long time. She crossed the kitchen and sat down across from him and looked at the notebook, at her father's careful pencil lines, the suggested mountain range, the east-facing light. And she was still for a moment. That was the most still he had seen her. Then she said, "Did my mother ask you to do this?" "No," he said. "Did she know?" "I don't think so," he said. "Not specifically." She looked at the notebook. "Why?" she said. Not with suspicion, with a genuine, direct inquiry of someone who needed to understand the actual answer, rather than an acceptable one. He thought about the answer. "Because he drew something worth building," he said. "And because—" He paused. "Because you said he would have liked people who went into things without calculating them. And I wanted—" He stopped. "What?" she said. "I wanted him to know," he said, "that I was that kind of person, even though he can't know." Clara Webb looked at him across her father's notebook in the kitchen of the house her father had drawn in Missouri, in the morning light coming through the south window, and she was quiet for a very long time. Then she said, "He knows." He held that. "All right," he said. "Caleb," she said. He looked at her. "I want to have that conversation now," she said. "The one you told my mother we would have in Oregon, after the house." He closed the notebook. He set it on the table between them. "All right," he said. I'm going to say what I think," she said. "And I would like you to say what you think. And I would like both of us to mean exactly what we say, and nothing we don't mean." "Those are my terms too," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "I think I have been in love with you since the fort." He was very still. "Not," she paused, "not the kind of love that announces itself. The kind that arrives and settles in and waits to be acknowledged. I drove the Ford the way I would have driven it without you watching. That was true. But I was entirely aware that you were watching, and it mattered to me that you were watching. And that—" She stopped. "That is not nothing." He was quiet. "I think," she said, "that you have been in love with me since approximately the same time, and that you have been considerably less willing to say so." He looked at the notebook on the table between them. He looked at her father's drawings, the creek, the kitchen garden, the window facing east. And he thought about all the miles between Missouri and this kitchen, and all the Tuesdays in between, and the specific cost of saying out loud the thing that had been true since a woman drove a Ford without changing her line for an audience. He looked at her. "Yes," he said. "To both." She breathed. The sound of it was the sound of something released that had been held a long time. "All right," she said. "All right," he said. They sat in the morning light in the kitchen of the house with the windows and the fire built in the stove and the creek audible outside, and Oregon doing what Oregon did in November, cold and clear and enormous and entirely unconcerned with the small, bright weight of two people deciding something at a kitchen table. After a while, he said, "I should speak to your mother." "She will say she told you so," Clara said. "I know," he said. She will be insufferable about it for at least a week, Clara said. Probably longer, he said. She almost smiled. He saw the full version, confirmed it, and something in his chest did the specific thing it had been doing since the Ford, with increasing frequency and decreasing surprise. Go, she said. She's on the porch. She goes to the porch in the mornings now. She says the light is good. He stood. He went to the porch. Margaret Webb was in the chair he had built for her, low-sided, with arms she could push out of when the shoulder was bad, positioned at the porch's east corner where the morning light came in full. She had the notebook in her lap, and she was not reading it. She was looking at the mountains, visible above the fir trees at the meadow's edge, going from shadow to gold in the early light. She heard him come out. She did not look away from the mountains. Well, she said. Well, he said. He sat in the second chair. They were quiet for a moment. She told you first, Margaret said. Yes, he said. Good, she said. It should have been her. It should always have been her. She paused. What did you say? Yes, he said. To both. Margaret nodded. She looked at the mountains. I want to ask you something, she said. Yes, he said. Promise me, she said, that when the time comes, when I am no longer here, that you will take care not to let her become the kind of person who is defined by the taking care of others. She paused. She has been doing that since she was 11. Since I needed her to. She is good at it. She is so good at it that she has forgotten it is not the only thing she is. She looked at him. Don't let her disappear into you. Don't let her become only what you need. Let her be what she is. He looked at her. That is what I fell in love with, he said. Margaret Webb looked at him for a long moment. I know, she said. That is why I chose you. She returned, her eyes to the mountains. You can speak to me about marriage now, she said, if you intend to. I intend to ask her, he said, not you. She paused. Mr. Horn, she said. Caleb, he said. Caleb, she said. That is the correct answer. She picked up the notebook from her lap. She held it toward him. Keep this, she said. You've already built it. You should have the original. He took the notebook. He looked at it in his hands. Margaret, he said. Yes. Thank you for going into the situation without calculating it first, he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she made the sound he had heard once before, at the edge of the claim, when she had stood on her husband's land for the first time. Small and brief, and immediately controlled. The sound of something put down. He told you so, she said. He would have told you. He never calculated anything either. It drove me absolutely. She stopped. Her voice had gone warm and rough in the specific way of someone speaking about a person they loved past the point of losing them. It drove me to distraction. I know, he said. You couldn't possibly know, she said. No, he said. But I am beginning to. She almost smiled. It was the most complete smile he had seen on her face. He went back inside. He asked Clara Webb in December. Not on a specific occasion, not with ceremony or setting. He asked her in the kitchen on a Tuesday evening. It was a Tuesday, which seemed correct, everything important in this particular chain of events having been a Tuesday. When the fire was built and the food was done, and Margaret was in the south room reading, and the house was the quiet, occupied, inhabited quiet of a place that had been built for the people in it. He asked her plainly. She said yes plainly. They told Margaret that evening. Margaret said, obviously. She said it with the equanimity of a woman who had known the answer since October and had simply been waiting for the relevant parties to reach it on their own schedule. Clara said, "Mama." Margaret said, "I told you so." Clara said, "You are insufferable." Margaret said, "Yes, but I am right." She was right. She had been right from the riverbank. She would never let any of them forget it. They married in January. The minister came from the nearest settlement through 6 inches of new snow and performed the ceremony on the porch of the house with the windows, in the cold, clear light of a January morning, with the mountains visible above the fir trees and the creek running dark under its skim of ice. Margaret Webb stood at the porch's edge and watched with the expression that had been building since the day she had stood on a riverbank and made a decision about a stranger. The expression of a woman who had finished something enormous. After the ceremony, when the minister had gone and Clara and Caleb were in the kitchen, and she had the porch to herself, she opened the notebook to the drawing of the house. She looked at the windows. She looked at the house around her. She looked at the mountains. She closed the notebook. She held it in her lap for a long time. Then she looked at the mountains and she said, very quietly, to no one that anyone else could see, "I went." And the mountains, which had been there for longer than any of this, and would be there long after, did what mountains always did. They stood, and it was sufficient. And she sat in the January light and breathed the Oregon air and was, for the first time in 4 years, finished. Margaret said, "I went," on the January porch, and the whole story was in those 2 words. If you felt what those 2 words carried, every mile of trail and every careful decision and every night she stayed awake managing what everyone else was asleep to. Like this video. Tell me where in the world you are watching from tonight and what those 2 words did to you. Subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. One more chapter and the epilogue, and this story will have given you everything it has. The second winter was better than the first. This was partly the house, the difference between a tent and walls being the difference between surviving winter and living in it. Partly the valley, which was milder than the mountains, and which Margaret's lungs received with the specific gratitude of something that has been working very hard for a long time and has been given a rest. Partly the arrangement of the 3 of them in the house, which had settled into the rhythms of people who had learned each other's company and had decided it was sufficient. He learned her. Not gradually. He was not a gradual man. He learned her the way he had learned the mountain, which was by paying full attention until the thing revealed its actual shape, and then trusting the shape rather than the idea of it. He learned that she was most she, herself at first light. When the house was quiet and she had not yet put on the competence that she wore through the day, like the canvas apron, the capability that was real but was also a presentation, the version of herself that was for the world. At first light, she was simply Clara, sitting with her coffee by the east window of the kitchen. And the light came in the way he had built it to come in and fell across her face. And she did not look at him and did not look at him, and was entirely herself. He sat with her at first light every morning. He did not always speak. She did not always speak. The silence was the specific silence of 2 people who were sufficient to each other even in the absence of content, which was the only silence worth having and the rarest. He learned that she laughed from somewhere genuine, from somewhere below the managed surface, and that when she laughed, it changed the quality of the room. He learned that she was stubborn about quality in a way that matched his own, that she would redo a thing rather than accept a result that was merely adequate, and that this was the stubbornness he most recognized in himself and most respected in her. He learned that she argued the way she did everything, directly, specifically, without cruelty and without retreat. and that losing an argument to her was more satisfying than winning one against someone who hadn't earned the disagreement. He learned that she was, in the moments when she thought no one was watching, tender with her mother in a way that was completely without the performance that tenderness sometimes acquired. She brought Margaret her coffee in the mornings, and she brought it at the exact temperature Margaret preferred, and she brought it without being asked, and she did not make it a thing. She simply did it, the way she did every practical thing, with quiet competence and no theater. He learned that this was who she was at the foundation. The care without announcement, the doing without requiring the doing to be seen. He had known the foundation since the Ford. Living in the house of it was different from observing it from the outside. It was better. Margaret made it through the second winter. The doctor who came to the valley in March, a young man from Boston who had come west with the same impulse that brought most people west, the impulse toward something larger than what they had, examined her and spoke carefully and said what careful speech said, which was, more time than expected, but not unlimited time. And the quality of the time would depend on the quality of the care. The care was excellent. He made sure of it. Not by managing her. Margaret Webb did not permit management, and he had enough respect for the fact of her to understand this. But by being present in the specific way that presence was useful. The wood always cut. The fire always built. The shoulder always considered when the tasks were distributed. The chair always on. The porch when the morning was good enough for the porch. She let him. This was, from Margaret Webb, the most significant concession available. She let him. She told Clara in April. He was not in the house when it happened. He had taken himself to the far pasture for the afternoon with the specific deliberateness of a man who understood that some things needed privacy, and that the best thing he could do was not be there. He came back at evening, and Clara was at the kitchen table with her hands flat on the surface, and her face carrying something enormous that she was managing with the specific competence she had applied to every enormous thing her life had produced. She looked at him when he came in. He sat down across from her. She said, "She told me." He said, "Yes." "You knew," she said. "Since the pass," he said. "She told me the night after the summit." Clara was quiet for a moment. "Why didn't you tell me?" she said. Not with accusation. With the genuine question of someone who needed to understand. "Because she asked me not to," he said. "And because..." He paused. "Because she was right. You would have spent everything managing it instead of living it." She held that. "I'm angry," she said. "I know," he said. "At her," she said. "Not at you. Mostly at her." "I know," he said. "And I understand why she did it," she said. "And that makes the anger." She stopped. "It makes it very complicated." "Yes," he said. She looked at her hands on the table. "How long?" she said. "No one knows exactly," he said. "The doctor says the valley has been good for her. This spring has been good for her." He paused. "She is not leaving quickly?" Clara nodded. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I need to tell you something." "Tell me," he said. "I am grateful," she said, "that you were there, on the riverbank, and at the ford, and at the summit." She looked at him. "I am grateful that she asked you, and that you said no, and that you came back anyway. I am grateful that you built the window facing east." She paused. "I am telling you this now because I do not say it enough, and because I have been thinking about what it means when time is..." She stopped. "I do not want to be a person who doesn't say things because there is time to say them later." He looked at her. "Clara," he said. She looked at him. "I know," he said. She nodded. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. They sat like that while the fire built itself to the size it needed to be, and the creek ran outside, and the mountains held the valley in their enormous, patient, permanent arms. Margaret Webb died on a Tuesday in October, the 2nd October, the year after the pass. She died in the south room with the window that faced the light she had asked for, in the chair that had been positioned to catch the morning, with Clara beside her, and him at the door, giving them the space that was theirs and being present enough that she knew he was there. He had learned her. He had learned that she needed to know he was there even when she could not see him. He stood at the door. She knew he was there. They buried her beside the creek, under the oak at the south corner that caught the light at the right angle, because she had chosen it herself in June, and had told Clara, and Clara had told him, and he had prepared the ground in September when the earth was still workable, quietly, before the cold came. The way you prepared things in advance, when you had learned to pay attention. He dug the grave himself. Reed came from his claim 3 miles east, and 3 other families from the wagon train. And the minister came again, and they stood in the October light at the creek's edge, and said the things people said and the things people didn't say, but meant. After, when the others had gone, he and Clara stood at the grave together for a long time without speaking. Then Clara said, "She told you to let me be what I am." He looked at her. "She told me the same thing," Clara said. "The morning of the wedding. She said—" She stopped. "She said you were the kind of man who would let a person be what they were. She said that was the thing she had been looking for, and that she had found it in under 5 seconds on a riverbank." He said nothing. "She was right about you," Clara said. "From the beginning." "I know," he said. "She was right about most things," Clara said. "She was right about all the things that mattered," he said. Clara looked at the grave. "She went," Clara said. "She said that was the whole of it. On the porch the morning of the wedding, she said, 'I went.'" She paused. "I didn't know what she meant then." "Do you know now?" he said. Clara was quiet for a moment. "She meant," Clara said, "that she didn't let the difficulty be the reason not to. That she packed the wagon, and she went and she got there, and she saw the house built, and she put down the notebook." She paused. "That was what she came to do. She did it." He looked at the creek running cold and clear in the October light. He thought about a woman who had looked at a stranger for 5 seconds and made the best decision of the last 4 years of her life. He thought about what it cost to make decisions like that. He thought about what it gave. "She did it," he said. Clara reached for his hand. He held it. They stood at the creek for a long time. Then she said, "Come inside. I'll build the fire." He looked at her. "I'll build the fire," he said. She almost smiled. "You always build the fire," she said. "Yes," he said. "I do." They went inside. He built the fire. That night, after the fire was built and the food was done and the house had gone quiet around them, Clara went upstairs to her room. He stayed at the kitchen table for a while. He had the notebook in front of him. He opened it. He looked at the drawings, the house, the kitchen garden, the creek at the south corner, the barn, the room with the window facing east, and the mountains suggested in soft pencil lines beyond. He looked at what had been drawn, and he thought about what had been built. He turned to the last page of the notebook. It was blank. He had looked at this page before, and it had simply been the last page. The end of the drawings, the end of the planning, the completion of the thing. But tonight, in the kitchen of the house that had been built from these drawings, He understood what the blank page was. It was not the end. It was the space after the plan was finished and the living had begun. It was every morning he had sat with Clara at the east window. Every Tuesday that had turned out to be something. Every fire built and every ford crossed and every summit reached. The blank page was not empty. It was full. It was everything that had happened that her father had not been there to draw. He closed the notebook. He looked at the fire. And then he took a pencil from the shelf above the table. The same shelf where Margaret had kept her sewing, where Clara now kept her 3 books. And he opened the notebook to the blank page. And he began to draw. He opened to the blank page, and he began to draw. If this story found you tonight, and Margaret Webb will be with you for a long time after this. Like this video right now. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world you are watching from and what this story gave you. 1 word, 1 sentence, whatever you have. Subscribe so you never miss a story built at this standard, Wednesday and Saturday every week. Share this with someone who has been carrying a notebook of their own. The epilogue is next. It is short. It earns everything this story built. Epilogue. The blank page. Spring came to the Willamette Valley the way it came to places that had earned it, not with announcement, but with arrival. The creek thawed in March. The meadow greened in April, coming up dark and vivid in the soil that had been resting since fall. And the oak at the south corner put out its first leaves, and the mountains above the fir trees shed the last of their winter white from the peaks and stood bare and clear against the April sky. He was at the porch when the spring arrived fully. The specific morning when you stopped being aware of the cold and started being aware of the warmth. And he stood and looked at the valley the way he had looked at it every morning since they arrived. It was the same valley it had been in November. It was entirely different. He had spent 12 years on a mountain learning to read landscapes. He had read this one every morning for 5 months, and he was still reading it, still finding things in it he had not found the morning before. This was, he had come to understand, the difference between a landscape that was beautiful and a landscape that was yours. Beauty you exhausted. Yours you didn't. Clara came out. She stood beside him at the porch rail. She was wearing his coat, the bare fur coat that she had taken to wearing in the cold mornings, which was enormous on her and had stopped looking wrong approximately 30 minutes after she first put it on. And her dark hair was loose in the early light, and she was carrying 2 cups of coffee, and she gave him one. And they stood and looked at the valley. She had found the drawings in the notebook. She had not said anything about them yet. He had known she found them, had seen her close the notebook and set it back on the shelf, and had waited. She had not said anything for 3 days, which was either because she needed the time or because she was letting him have it. He did not know which. "I found your drawings," she said. "I know," he said. "The barn extension," she said. "The kitchen garden, expanded. The second porch on the north side." "Yes," he said. "The room," she said. "The one you drew above the kitchen, with the—" She stopped. "With the window facing east," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "That is not a room we need," she said carefully. "No," he said. "Not yet." She turned and looked at him. He looked back at her. "Are you drawing something?" she said. "Or are you asking something?" "Both," he said. She looked at the valley for a moment. At the creek running in the April morning. At the oak at the south corner. At the mountains bare and clear above the fir trees. At the coat on her own shoulders that smelled of wood smoke and 12 years, and the river where everything started. Then she looked at him. "Yes," she said. He nodded. She looked at the valley. He looked at the valley. They drank their coffee. After a while, she said, "She would have something to say about this." "Yes," he said. "Something insufferable," Clara said, almost. "Certainly," he said. "She would say she told us so," Clara said. "She would be right," he said. Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, quietly, in the direction of the oak at the south corner of the meadow, the one that caught the morning light at the right angle, "I know, Mama." The oak said nothing. The creek ran. The mountains stood in the April light. And Caleb Horn, who had come down from the mountain on a Tuesday morning in October of 1841 for salt and coffee and cartridges, stood on the porch of a house he had built from a dead man's drawings, with his wife beside him in his coat, and the valley ahead of them, and the blank page filling in the way blank pages filled when the living was good. Not all at once, not with announcement, but steadily and fully and permanently, and with the specific weight of things that had been earned rather than given. He had the notebook in his coat pocket. He had been adding to it every morning. He had not yet run out of pages. He did not expect to. This is the story of Caleb Horn and Clara Webb, and of Margaret Webb, who looked at a stranger on a riverbank for 5 seconds, made a decision that changed 4 lives, 3 of them living, 1 of them drawing windows into houses he would not be there to build. She went. That was the whole of it. She went. If this story found you tonight, if Margaret Webb's 5 seconds on the riverbank reached somewhere specific, if the blank page made you think about the blank pages in your own life, if the coat on Clara's shoulders in the April morning made you feel something you weren't expecting, if She Went is still with you right now, tell me. Right now, in the comments. Your favorite moment, the line that stayed, 1 word for how you feel. Tell me where in the world you are watching from. Because we have listeners in every corner of this earth, and this story was built for every one of you. Wherever you are, whatever Tuesday you are coming from, like this video. Subscribe if you haven't already. We drop stories built exactly like this one every Wednesday and Saturday. And every single one is built to earn your time and your trust. Share this with someone tonight. Someone who has been carrying a notebook. Someone who went into a river once without thinking about it. Someone who needs to be reminded that going anyway is always the right answer. Until Wednesday, be strong, be honest, go anyway. And remember, the blank page is not the end. It is the space where the living begins. See you Wednesday.